Hello, I'm Otto Tausk, Music Director of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and this week we're playing one of my absolute favorite scores. It's the ballet music to the Romeo Juliet by Prokofiev. And we're all used to this music in the suite form. So there are a couple of suites made from the entire ballet music, but what we're doing is we're playing the entire score, which is I think one of the most colorful, beautiful scores ever written. So I'm really happy that we can present all those wonderful movements that you hardly ever hear if you're not going to the ballet, that is, of course. Now, we're not just presenting the music, we're presenting the Romeo and Juliet story with some live visual animation. And for that purpose, we have invited some extraordinary artists, and they are here with me. And perhaps you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm Amelia Scott. I'm one of the co-creators on the project.
Hi, and I'm Wladimiro Woyno Rodriguez, and I am also a co-creator and kind of a leader of the Precursor Lab, which is kind of the group that is organizing the animation.
So welcome, and it's great to have you with us this week. But for you, of course, it's not only this week. You've been working on this project for quite some time now. So you were talking about the Precursor Lab. Perhaps you can just help us a bit on what that actually is.
Yeah, so the Precursor Lab is based at the School for Contemporary Arts at Simon Fraser University, and it's a sort of a new laboratory that explores the process of creation and exploring particularly the elements that are technical and design-led. So looking at sort of starting collaborations with a visual element, or with sort of the space or the image, mm-hmm. right? So sort of a design-led directorial intent that is different from kind of the always text-based or always playwright-based or always director-based things. So we thought in a way that this was a really interesting kind of first project for the Precursor Lab, in a way to integrate us ourselves with mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
A live score,
mm-hmm.
So it's sort of a unique collaboration in between kind of live animation and right. live music.
So what are we actually seeing on stage? So I have this big screen in front of me and I can see what comes out, but you're actually doing something while we're playing and you're hidden far away in the back. So maybe you can just explain a bit of how that actually works.
Mm-hmm. So the basics of it is that we have, it's all analog kind of lo-fi projections. So we're using these overhead projectors that are kind of like your high school
mm-hmm.
version mathematics class projectors. We have 4 of them, and they all converge on one kind of 8-foot screen. And on that screen, we have a series of backdrops or shadow puppets that we're playing, and there's multiple operators. And so, for example, we'll have Romeo walk into the frame, and we'll bring in a backdrop from the overhead projector, and that will set the composition. So we're kind of
right.
live compositing,
right.
sort of what you would do in a digital editor, but we're
right.
doing it as live. So it means that we can respond to the music. It means that we can respond to each other,
yep.
and we can have this intimate living moment,
right.
which I think is the kind of the most beautiful right. part of a live performance, is the ephemerality of it.
Yeah. So you're recreating the story of Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
And are you doing something special with it? Is it just the story, or are you giving a new insight to the story somehow?
Yeah, I mean, we're working, of course, from the score, which in itself is an adaptation of Shakespeare's work, but we are taking it and we're sort of setting it in Vancouver, mm-hmm. and in a more contemporary kind of stylized world. You know, I watch a lot of films that are made here. The Vancouver is a very kind of a central city for cinema, and I always find that Vancouver never plays itself. I think that Vancouver is always playing New York. It's always trying to play a different city, and I'm curious to kind of highlight the kind of sites and
right.
locations of the city. So we decided to set Romeo and Juliet sort of in Vancouver, and it gave us all this source material, and we know the city, and we know kind of the kind of people that we would adapt it to. So
right.
it's sort of set in a contemporary context, with some anachronisms,
right.
but in a contemporary context and in the city of Vancouver.
Right. Fascinating. So Wladimiro and Amelia, so how does that work together? What's your part in all of this?
Well, Vlad brought me on to kind of co-lead with the visual dramaturgy of the piece, so that spans from image creation, storyboarding sequences based off of the music. We're both performing in the show as well, but we're sort of...
So you're performing live as a person or with the shadow puppets?
Both.
In both ways, yeah. So there's moments where we'll have live performers. We're we have a team of 9 who are on stage doing everything. We'll step in and use our live bodies, silhouettes as various characters throughout the show. And there's a mixture of using paper puppets and live bodies. Sometimes characters appear both in puppet form and as a live performer. And it's been a lot of fun to play with because the puppetry sometimes can be a bit limited in the motion that it gives us.
Yes.
So really detailed shots that are really trying to convey a specific emotion or connection between 2 characters. Having a live body on stage can give us a lot more control over that motion. And then when we switch to paper puppets, we get different compositions, we can get close-ups, we can really stylize the moment, we can play with perspective and gravity and things like that. So we get a great variety by switching between these 2 aesthetics.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and what's really different in a way too is that for us, we're both designers. We both work primarily as projection designers in the theater, dance, opera, live music scene. So we're not always sort of making the choices. We're usually working in support of a particular director or a particular artist. And so as part of the Precursor Lab and these kind of collaborations, the idea is to take some of these folks that have a lot of skill, have years of experience working in storytelling, but giving them the opportunity to kind of take the reins and figure out what that means, right? And so it's putting ourselves in the hot seat as the director and creators of the project. And we're also working in a different way because we don't have the same approach that a textual director would normally have or an actor director would normally have. We're approaching things from a visual composition. So we direct totally different. And so in a unique way, we brought on kind of a group of devisers, essentially. Most of them are recent graduates from the Simon Fraser program at School for the Contemporary Arts. Some of them are current students. And the idea is that we kind of decentralize the process a little bit. It's less hierarchical and it's a shared vision, it's a shared creation. Anyone can kind of participate in, what about this idea? What if we put Romeo here and then slowly pan the background and we'll try it. And anyone can kind of contribute in that way. So it's been this kind of collection of ideas and we've worked in an iterative way. So let's try a bunch of different versions for that thing. We'll record them, we'll sit and watch all together, we'll talk about it, we'll decide what the best idea is, and we kind of build it like that.
It sounds a bit like this is one of the strong characteristics of what you do. You let the process be very creative and not with a fixed ending in mind. So I'm just wondering, how does that work for you? How did you approach this piece actually? So I remember when I've done this a lot with the ballet, and I've always tried to find the characters of the dancers on stage in the music to see how actually the music colors what the story is telling, not just who's in love with who and who is fighting who, but also how do they feel? What are they thinking? What are the dilemmas? And I've always found with Prokofiev that the answers are very much in the notes and in the color. So I wonder, did you start with the story? Did you start with the music? How did that process start?
We started sort of with both. We reviewed the Shakespeare and really breaking down the plot points and then studying the score as well, which tells a slightly different narrative or adjusted in certain ways. So lining up kind of the plot from the Shakespeare with the score, there's certain characters that we don't have in our version, but characters that the score isn't supporting specifically. So really we eventually relied heavily on the music as well because all of the motivations of the characters and how they change throughout the show, it's all laid out for you.
Wow. And so do you think that if we have one performance, right? So unfortunately not 10 performances, which would be wonderful, of course, after all that work. But who knows, in the future we might do this again. And could you imagine then what happens in next performances could be very different from the first?
Yeah, absolutely. Even within it, I think when we rehearse it and perform it, we're sequencing ourselves and placing ourselves within the movements, and so there isn't always like every beat is not matched to every particular note.
Right.
We're actually kind of situating ourselves and locating ourselves within a sequence and within a narrative point. We're like, how many, sort of the mathematics of this is how many images or how many beats does it take to tell this story point visually without having to use text.
Yeah.
Right? So we use very, very, very little text. In fact, I think the majority of the text is just, we tell you who the characters are, we present them, we say this is Juliet, this is Mercutio.
And that's it.
And that's it. So how do we then kind of collect and tell the narrative points? What happens first, what happens second?
Yes. And how do you connect to the music? And so you were saying you were there with how many people?
There's a total of 9 people.
9 people. So all the 9 people should know the music really well, right? Yeah. So how did that work? How did you get to know the music? So you just listen to it a lot?
Yeah, and we rehearse. So we'll start our rehearsal. We'll say, okay, today we're going to work on the balcony scene. Right. And so we have to figure out, okay, we know that Juliet is in a condominium in Vancouver in a really fancy building. Romeo has left the party. He has to come back. You know, he has a moment of realization. She looks down. She throws a rose. And we have to kind of rehearse kind of with the images what that sequencing is. And so just through like trial and error of like, okay, first we want to see, and you plan it sort of like a film. We kind of storyboard some moments to kind of give us a starting place, but it's never always the end, like the end result is not always the storyboard. It ends up being kind of mutating or expanding beyond the storyboard.
Okay.
And we always, we spent a lot of time individually reviewing the score and getting familiar with it, but whenever we were rehearsing, we would listen to it all together as a group, matching out, again, those plot points that are so clearly indicated in the music. And so just through that collective rehearsal, we were always listening to it together. That gained familiarity as well.
And there's some moments that are very kind of stylized and particular to particular beats in the music, but we also have improvisational sections, and so we kind of go from very literal moments and narrative character points or story points, but we also kind of want to give room absolutely first to the music, and so we have moments where we kind of step back a little bit from the characters and that stuff and step back into a more visual abstract world. And so we have found sort of this kind of dual world of like the stylized Vancouver, which we've kind of created through a series of watercolor renderings of the city, of different locations. But we want to be able to also go to something more abstract. And so we have found that, the Capulets are sharp squares and triangles and circles, and the Montagues are kind of in lighter tones of color, like blues and greens, and they're circles. And so we kind of also go to this kind of shape world and an abstracted place. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for doing this project with us. What we've seen so far in the rehearsal, just a little bit, already looks amazing, really gorgeous, and I'm so much looking forward to see the entire performance. And thank you for being with us and for your creative input. And I think it's adding a lot to the story and adding a lot to what we're saying with the music also. So thank you so much and enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.